This is February 7th, 1983. This is Joe Todd. Interview with Cecil Samara, S-A-M-A-R-A. Mr. Samara, when were you born?
Joe, I was born 1916, December the 4th, 1916.
Where were you born?
Right here in Oklahoma City, sir.
Don't call me sir.
You can raise.
Who was your father?
My father was David Samara.
Was he from Oklahoma?
No, he was born in Lebanon. He was about 14 years old when he came over to this country.
Who was your mother?
My mother is Lizzie. Her maiden name was Shadid, S-H-A-D-I-D. And she was about 11 years old when she came over to this country, also from Lebanon.
What did your father do? What kind of...
My father was a peddler in the horse and buggy days.
Did your parents ever talk about the trip coming over to this country?
Yes, many a time. My grandfather, who my mother's father, had came over to this country prior to any of the family coming over here. And he worked and was a peddler and so forth back in those days, and worked in Kansas and Oklahoma. And that was several years that he was here, probably about 5 or 6 years before he could send over after the family. And not knowing reading or writing English language, as you well know, back in those days, the farmers would they would call on the farmers, and they would they would stay there overnight and trade them goods and things for board and room. And any cash sales that they took, they got it in silver, and they didn't know the one bill from another bill at first. And they would take this money to the banks and keep it till they could send over, and he would send over money at all times. My grandmother, who was Presbyterian, she was a Presbyterian teacher there in Lebanon. She was also at the American University of Beirut there too, and all my folks are Presbyterians. And then whenever he finally got enough money to have them come over, why, they came over on the boat and settled here in the I guess it was Oklahoma City was the place that they finally chose.
Why did they choose Oklahoma City? Did they ever say?
Well, because they had various relatives around Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas that were already here.
You say what was your grandfather's name?
Joe, I'm trying to think. Slameen, and I can only give you the Lebanese
Sure.
name, which was Salim, and they would pronounce it Shdid in Lebanon, which is shaded, Shadid, here in our country.
Okay. And he was a peddler in Kansas and Oklahoma. You say.
Yes.
What kind of goods did he sell?
Soft goods such as scarves and dresses and maybe a few shoes and things like this and tablecloths, silk items, and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Did he ever talk about the boat trip?
Yes, he did.
What were the conditions on the ship?
It was times they weren't for sure that they were even going to make it through the atmosphere and weather conditions and etc. But when they landed in New York and in this country, the first thing they did was kiss the ground, thank God they were here.
They came to Ellis Island then?
Yes.
Did they ever talk about Ellis Island?
Yes, but they were quite a group of people that were there meeting them to meet them, and it took quite some time for them to ever arrive in Oklahoma from the trip out of New York.
How'd they come to Oklahoma?
You mean from
Yeah,
New York?
New York.
It was a horse and buggy situation. They would stop, and different relatives throughout on the trip, and that in that manner.
How long did it take to come from Lebanon to New York by boat? Did they say?
Yes, excuse me. My mother said that it took, if I remember right, in the neighborhood of 45 days. And that's approximate, of course.
Did your grandparents live in Lebanon?
Yes.
I mean, in Beirut?
Yes, yes.
And your grandmother was at the American University in Beirut.
Right.
What was her name?
I have to again, Mary Shaded, or Mary, no, at that time, her name was Mary. Before my grandfather and she were married, her name was Zakura, Zakoura.
What year did they come over?
Well, Joe, I'm not positive. Now, my mother was 11 years old when she came over to this country. In fact, she's still living, and she's 86 years old now.
Mm-hmm. And your father was a peddler also?
Right. Yes, sir.
Okay. And did he sell the same type of
Yes.
software?
Right.
Okay.
The funny thing about that, let me tell you, he had a COD shipment to come in to him at Shawnee, Oklahoma, and he didn't have the money to pay for it. And he went into the bank to borrow the money. And the banker asked him, of course, he wanted some collateral, wanted to know who signed the note with him and so forth. And he said, God will sign the note for me. And the banker in dismay, I suppose, or what. At any rate, he loaned him the money, and within 2 weeks' time, my father had gone back and paid back the note at the bank. And he also did not charge my father any interest for the money, and my father gave him a nice gift.
That's good. How large of an area did your father cover?
He covered, I'd say a neighborhood of 100-mile area. And I'll tell you now that my father died in 1918 back during the flu epidemic. And my mother couldn't speak no right English, and she was pregnant with my sister at that time. And I was 2.5 years old. I don't remember my father. And she picked chickens at Wilson Company, and I sold newspapers downtown on the corner of Grand and Harvey for years and years and years. At that time, we had the Scripps Howard paper here, the Oklahoma News, and the Daily Oklahoman also. And I was barefooted, holes in my overalls, and I was raised in the slums of Oklahoma City, back on Reno, Grand, Harvey. Those old shacks were rented for around $11 a month, and there was no running water, toilets in the house that time, and so forth. And if I told you I had a bath once a month, I'd be lying to you. But I quit school when I was in about 3rd grade, and I sold newspapers down there for years and years and years, and I had customers in the various office buildings downtown. And the paper sold for 2 cents a paper, and people would, I'd go and try to collect my 12 cents at the end of the week. At that time, the Ramsey Tower, the Liberty Bank building was the Ramsey Tower. And different things, of course, have changed today, but times and conditions were very, very, you could get a hot dog for a nickel, buy a loaf of bread for a nickel, and that sort of thing, and back in those days. But I come back to trying to collect my 12 cents from my customers. At the end of the week or on Mondays, I'd go and see them, and if you caught the doctor or business or professional man, whoever it was, in his office, he'd look in the desk drawer like he was going to pay you, and he'd say, well, Betty spent all the petty cash for postage. If you caught the girl, the office girl there, she'd look in the drawer like she was going to pay you, and she'd say, well, Jim didn't leave any petty cash. Wasn't that, don't misunderstand the story, nobody was trying to beat you out of anything, but times and conditions were such. But they would hit a deal or collect a debt or this or that or the other, and they'd be looking for you to pay you, owe you 3 or 4 weeks, and they'd pay you off and give you an extra quarter, and that was big money. And when I was about 5 or 6, 7 years old, I used to hitchhike down to OU to watch football games. And I've been a nut for football all my life. Then later years, why I realized I wasn't getting an education. Thank God we live in the greatest country in the world. If you want an education in this country, it's here for you. I would hitchhike down to Norman to the library and spend a lot of time in the library, and students would help me with give me pencil and paper and assignments and that sort of thing, and I did an awful lot of time there. Then later, I spent a lot of time in the different classrooms there, although I was never enrolled there. One of the professors had never kicked me out, and they would help me with paper assignments and that sort of thing. And I thank God for all that. And I wouldn't trade that education that I got for anything in the world. Then, of course, I sold newspapers there on the corner of Grand and Harvey up until I was about 16, 17 years old. And then after I was married and God was good to us, we got 5 children, 7 grandchildren, and I figured everything I gained in life was through God and University of Oklahoma. And our family, our children were all brought up over here at Trinity Baptist Church and on 23rd Street. And thank God they're all been very great and have caused us no problems of any kind or anything. In fact, my oldest daughter, to tell you a little joke, my oldest daughter graduated from OU in 62, and she was a 4-point in nursing. She was supposed to have been my football player, but I settled for that. And when she graduated, why, the University Med Center wanted her to go over to Children's Hospital. And she went over there and was on the staff there for a number of years. And she married a little guy that graduated from med school, Dr. Dan Tubb, whose offices now are in Edmond. In fact, he has offices in Guthrie and El Reno also, and he does vascular surgery. And we have 2 grandchildren with them, but they did he did his internship in Honolulu, Hawaii. And just recently, within this year, my oldest daughter at the university had called her, and she went back to work over there at Children's Hospital. And whether you know or not, I'm very involved with Crippled Children's Hospital and helping them and raising money and donating a lot of money and things, using our little car that I drive with the OU football team, promotional things for raising money to help build a Ronald McDonald House there.
That's good.
Well, pardon me. I'd like to also tell you that in 1948, when I first got the little Model T that I drive with the OU football team, was a piece of junk, and we worked on that thing 2 years before I ever drove it a mile. And my idea was to drive it to the home games only. Well, in 1950 was my first home game to drive it to, and the cheerleaders and the Roughnecks at that time tried to get me to take it to Texas, and I said, no way, it'll never get there. In 51 they tried, and I said no. In 52 I finally agreed, and that was my first out-of-town trip, and it was in 52. And I've driven it to the Texas OU game every year since. And this last year, I think, was my 30th year to drive it to the Texas OU ball game. And I've driven it to the Orange Bowl 8 times, Chicago, Notre Dame, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and all over the Big 8 circuit. But what makes it really nice on my travels and all, our state highway patrol rides to all the states that I go through, and our police department rides to the police departments on my overnight stays, and the governor writes letters to all the governors and states that I go through, and Chamber of Commerce writes letters, and I'm met by dignitaries, coffee stops, luncheons, dinners. All this takes place on my travels, which makes it very nice. We've tried very hard to keep the car very clean and away from rough stuff and so forth. And this is the thing, of course. We strictly boost Oklahoma and not only just our university, but I think we've got the greatest state in the union. And where I give a lot of talks all over the state all the time, civic clubs, organizations, and so forth. And I'd like for you to know how I end up my talk. And of course, I talk about Oklahoma and how great Oklahoma is. We've got agricultural-wise, water-wise, lakes, raising racehorses, peanuts. What there's, I think I can't. I could go on and on and on talking about this great state and history of it, and I think the way I started to tell you, the way I end up my talks, I'm proud. I'm American born. I'm proud of the fact, greatest state in the Union, Oklahoma. I can tell you a lot of things that have happened. People have sent me things, sports fans all over the country, people that I don't know. I hear from letters all the time, and people I met, and this and that and the other. For instance, we were at the Super Bowl the other day, and we spent a week down there, and people knew who I was, and sports fans all over that I met and had dinner with them, and had one of the greatest times I could ever have.
That's good.
And if ever I had my life to change over or do anything different in my life, I wouldn't want anything changed. I'm 66 years old, and of course, we're in the flag business. We ship flags all over the country. We make logo flags, put out flag poles. There's nothing in the way of flags that we don't have and carry. Any flag, even on the premises, Christian flags, you name it, Canadian flags, Texas flags, Oklahoma flags, U.S. flags of all kinds and material. And we have anything in the flag business, regardless how small it is or how large it is. If there's anything you need for updating your flagpole, you want a gold ball on top or an eagle or anything like this, we carry that, and the halyards, clips, and whatever, regardless of what it is, how small or large it is, well, we have it here on the premises.
That's good.
And we've been in the flag business for over 20 years. I'd like to go back to another thing. My mother was an Eastern Star in Rebecca, and she always had these little ladies over for coffee and snacks and things like that. And one thing that's sitting on her TV now and has been and always is a set of Oklahoma and U.S. flags and her naturalization papers. And today she calls me, or I call her 2 or 3 times a day and see how she is. She can't hear too good and she can't see too good. But she keeps her Bible right there by her, and if she needs groceries or anything, we take them to her. Oh, I have to laugh, tell you something. This is so funny. Several years ago, she'd always call up here and want me to bring so-and-so in groceries when she was having the ladies from the Eastern Star and Rebecca's over and that sort of thing. Why, she would want me to always get her some special things. She's making little goodies and cakes and things for them. And one time she called up and wanted me to come over there, and I said, not now. I said, I'm too busy and I've had too many problems. She says, I need this right away regardless. So rather than to say anything, why, I got in the car and went over there but to tell you the problems that I was having, the day before our hot water tank went out, the day before that our roof had started leaking, and that morning that I went over there, our wash machine went out on us. And I went over there and took these things over there, and I was very upset, all the rest of it. And I happened to use the word damn, and she said, "What's the matter?" and so forth. And I told her, and she says, "You get out on your knees and thank God you're living in this great country of ours, and don't ever say anything about anything going wrong. You would probably get upset if you had to put a light bulb in your socket that might go out, you know." And then she had me to kiss the American flag and so forth, and I felt very good when I left there.
Mm-hmm.
That actually happened.
Yeah. When did you go see your first football game?
Whenever I was about 6 years old.
1922, 23?
Probably, yes.
Who was coach down at OU then?
I don't remember, Joe. The coaching wasn't. I don't. I remember when Benny Owens was there.
Did you know him?
Yes. And I knew.
Okay.
One, I'd like to tell you too, Joe, when we first got married, why the last thing, of course, we talked about, my wife and I, was having any children. We didn't have any money or anything else. We finally moved in an apartment over on East Drive that got half a month pay on that, and water and garbage was paid, and we didn't have the money to put up our utilities for gas and lights. And we stayed there for probably 3 weeks before we got money enough to put up our deposit for gas and lights. And we'd go around finding pop bottles and everything else. And at this time, I was working out the U.S. Army Engineers at Tinker Field, building Tinker Field. And I was a concrete testing engineer for them, which I told them what schooling I had and everything, and was fortunate enough to have that job. And the first thing I knew that Lucille was pregnant at that time with our oldest daughter. And as I told you, that was the last thing we wanted was any children until we could afford a family. But I worked out there at Tinker Field, and then I was working 3 jobs. I worked for Beverly Osborne when he had his place on by the state capitol, and jerking sodas and so forth for him there. And I even hopped bells at the Biltmore Hotel. And the other thing that I was doing, and when our first baby was born, thank God we had the money to pay the doctor bill and the hospital bill and so forth. And then first thing I knew, we were having babies like popcorn. And this kept up my working 3 jobs for quite some time. And finally, different things happened, and I put in a business that was called Cecil's Personal Service. Tell you what that consisted of. It wasn't anything that we wouldn't do for anybody that called in, well, if they wanted us to go downtown, do their personal shopping, mow their yard, have their yard mowed, or anything. I had several people in line that was on call for doing various jobs and that sort of thing, and we worked at that for a number of years, and then we had our own. I belonged to real estate commission at that time too, and my wife also was a realtor, and then even my oldest girl was passed examination for real estate examination, and then later, of course, we got into the flag business, and I can tell you this too, through our flag business, we meet the nicest people in all the world throughout the whole country, and it has been wonderful.
Let me. Okay. When did you start the flag service?
About, I'd say almost maybe about 20, 22 years ago.
How well did you know Benny Owen?
Well, I knew him as to him, I was probably the biggest pest he knew. Uh, I was slipping in the gates and stuff like that, and I would try to get as close to him at all times when I could, when I could, and that sort of thing.
What kind of person was he?
A very, very nice person, very nice, and he was Oh, uh, he wasn't always the best.
Okay.
He wasn't always the best or smiling person when we had a loss, but he was always hard nosed with the football players, and but he always had time to smile and visit with you.
Hmm. What kind of coach was he?
He was a good coach. He, he, he winning was his priority number one, and always the University of Oklahoma was tops on his list.
How long was he coach, Benny Owen?
I really don't remember. I know later that Jim Tatum was our coach before Bud Wilkinson,
Hmm.
and I think Jim Tatum left here, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was in 1948, and then Bud Wilkinson came here. And go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Bud Wilkinson came here, and of course, and I don't remember the year that Bob Kerr died, that January the 1st, that we were down at the Orange Bowl, and the wheels started turning, political wheels and things at that time. And by the way, that was one of the Orange Bowl games that we did lose, and we were playing Alabama that year. And that was when Joe Namath was coach, and we lost the ball game 17-0. But President Kennedy was president, and he was there sitting with J. Howard Edmondson, our governor at that time. And then Bud Wilkinson came back here and resigned as coach. And he was a registered Democrat here, and then he changed his politics to Republican and ran for the U.S. Senate. But in the meantime, J. Howard Edmondson resigned as governor, and Governor Nye appointed J. Howard Edmondson to take over the remaining part of the term of Bob Kerr's term. And Bud was President Kennedy had made Bud Wilkinson athletic director, athletic fitness director for the whole United States. And then when he ran for, changed his politics and ran for Senate, I think was one of the biggest wrongs or the worst possibly thing, because as far as I'm concerned, Bud Wilkinson could have had anything he wanted, whether we had a Republican president or a Democrat president. Of course, wherever you saw Bob Kerr on a platform, you would see Bud Wilkinson with him. And little farmer boy in the shortgrass country all over the state just couldn't understand him doing that. And as you well know, he lost a Senate race.
Hmm. How did you get the title of the world's biggest OU fan?
I'm really glad you asked me that, Joe. In 1952, as I told you earlier, was my first out-of-town trip in it, driving it to the Texas OU ball game.
That's the Big Red Rocket?
Yes. Danny Williams had me on his program the following week, and he dubbed me as OU's #1 football fan. He said anybody that would have guts enough to drive that Model T to the Texas OU ball game. It had to be OU's #1 football fan. And of course, the news media and everybody picked it up from there, and that was how that happened.
How many football games have you missed?
We haven't missed a football game in 32 years anywhere they've played.
Pretty good. You going to Hawaii this year?
Yes, sir. You bet we are.
I'm playing wrong.
And I'd like to tell you, too, that my wife is not the type of nut that I am, but she's one of the biggest fans and really knows football. In fact, I enjoy sitting by her watching a football game, or when games are even on TV, pro games or anything else. She can call the plays or tell me that there's so-and-so flag. By that time, well, the referee will throw the flag after she's made the statement that there's a penalty, and she'll tell me what the penalty is, and I think it's just great. And all of my kids had their choice of going to any school they wanted to, but if they wanted Papa and Mama's help, why, it was sent to the University of Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm. You say you were raised in the slum areas down on Reno?
Reno, Grand, Harvey. They used to have these beat up old shack houses down through there in the 800 and 900 block, 700, 800, 900 block. And as I told you before, there wasn't any inside toilets, water, any of that sort of thing. Of course, they were rat infested places, and the rent on them was $10, $11 a month.
There was a little village underneath one of the bridges on the Canadian River.
Yes, sir.
Did you ever live in one of those?
No. No. I stayed pretty close to the newspaper in downtown as much as I could. And it was easy going for her from there to Wilson Company, where she picked chickens out there.
What were these houses made of that you lived in?
Pine frame houses, little old cheaply built frame. In fact, the flooring was pine and the cheapest type of lumber.
How big were they, the houses?
2 and 3 and 4 room houses. Anytime we could get a little nicer house, about the same money, it wasn't any problem to move, you know.
How long did you live in that area?
Up until I was about 16, 17, 18 years old.
Mm-hmm. Did you do any work for the WPA?
No.
Oh, I know what I was going to ask you. What's your feeling of the university doing away with Little Red?
Well, I really think that was a terrible, terrible thing. You well know, Joe, we had people flying in here, Sports Illustrated, different national magazines, and people would come in and do stories on him and come down here particularly to do that. And I don't think anything gave the state any more publicity in all the world than our Little Red. And I don't know whether you know the story of how this all happened or not. Dr. Holloman was president of the University of Oklahoma at that time. And that was back when we really had the hippie days and long-haired people, and about a group of people that weren't even Indians, maybe 15 or 20 of them, barefooted and this long hair and long beard and filthy looking characters that went in there and told him that they wanted that stopped. It was discriminating, and Dr. Holloman listened to him, and then the first thing I knew, why, he jerked the rug out from under that.
I noticed, and I watched the Super Bowl, the Washington Redskins have a...
That's right. You bet they do. And
any chance of getting Little Red back?
I have worked on that personally and tried and tried and tried. But one of our Little Reds, when Kirk Kickingbird was, Joe, the next to the last Little Red we had was Kirk Kickingbird. He was from El Reno, Oklahoma, and he was over here numerous times when cheerleaders and roughnecks and some of our football teams come over for different dinners and parties that we would have here for them. And he was in law school at OU, and he graduated with great honors from law school. And just before he left, he went to Washington, D.C., and he's with Indian Affairs there now. He was from El Reno, Oklahoma. His dad was with the newspaper there for years and years and years there in El Reno. And just before he left for Washington, D.C., excuse me, he came by and gave me the little bells that he used on his boots, and which brings up another story. You know, in February of '79, we had a terrible, terrible fire here. Mm-hmm. And all my autographed footballs and everything was all gone. And in fact, our whole house, we were a year and a half rebuilding this place and getting back in it. We've lived here for over 32 years. And I would wake up, and after the fire, we stayed at the motel here at 39th in Portland, and I wouldn't go eat, wouldn't talk to anybody, go visit with anybody or anything else. And sports fans started calling from all over the whole United States and writing us letters and writing things like this. And then I even had 3 calls from Honolulu, Hawaii, and people wanted to know if I needed money or anything else, but I was so downhearted about it, losing all my mementos and everything, that then finally, I guess that was the thing that really brought me out of it. People calling from all over the country, and sports fans that I didn't know that knew me. And then finally one evening I said to Lucille, we're going to go out to dinner tonight. And she said, do you mean it? And I said, yes. And we went out to Applewoods and had dinner, and I told her to go rent another place, that we were going to rebuild this place. And then people started sending me things, and even from enemy territory from all over. You notice that plaque of helmets over there, yeah, that was sent to me from Nebraska fans, and people from Texas all over sent me things, and I've got a lot of things that were given to me. This plaque up here, there was only 3 of those that were put out. Mm-hmm. And Wade Walker got one, and Joe Humsley got one, and I got the 3rd one. That's signed that's from the whole team. And that's when Billy Sims was Heisman Trophy winner, and Greg Roberts won the Alton Trophy, and that was back in the Orange Bowl. We were Orange Bowl champs in 1979.
You know, I heard about your fire on the news in Austin, Texas.
Is that right? Well, it went all over United Press International, all over the United States, and I tell you, it's just unbelievable. And when you have friends like that, and all the rest of it, that means more than any money in the world, or anything else. Of course, money couldn't replace all the things that I lost, and but people knowing that you have friends in these days, that sports fans all over the country do those things, it certainly makes you feel good. And one thing everybody tells me throughout my travels and everything, Red, if you ever get tired of Oklahoma, move down here, we'll take good care of you. And everybody thinks I got one football, 2 football games I'd like to talk about.
I was going to ask, which is your favorite game?
Well, everybody would think that when we played Ohio in 1977, was the greatest ball game that's ever been played. And if you'll remember, the last few seconds of that ball game, why Uwe von Schamann was going to kick a field goal, try for a field goal. I think it was about a 43-yard field goal. And Woody Hayes called a timeout, and all the fans were booing Uwe, just booing him, all the Ohio State fans, everybody. And the game was being played there, of course. And he was thanking them from the stands and throwing up his hands and bowing to them and all the rest of it. And when their timeout was over, Oklahoma called a timeout. Barry called a timeout. And same thing, the same booing, everything else happened. And of course, he kicked that right through the uprights, and we won that ball game. Of course, we play Ohio State here this year too, at OU. But the greatest ball game to me that I saw was in Columbia, and I think this was about 14, 15 years ago. Bobby Warmack was the quarterback. Steve Zabel and Steve Owens were back in those days. And you could hear it was cold, snow. It had snowed the night before. It was very cold. And you could hear leather pop every down, every play, every down. You could hear leather pop in the stands. That's how hard they were hitting. And the ball, 4 downs and the ball would go over. 4 downs and the ball would go over. And the score was zip, zip through the whole ball game.
Was this in Columbus?
Yes.
Ohio State again?
No, at Columbia, Missouri.
Oh, Columbia, Missouri. Okay.
Right. And finally, about a minute and a half to go in that ball game, we had the football, and it was 3rd and 8 to go or so. But anyway, Bobby Warmack threw a pass and hit Steve Zabel in the end zone, and we won that ball game 7-0. To me, that was one of the greatest ball games I've ever seen.
Who's your favorite coach?
Well, I'd say Jim McKenzie was really my favorite coach for his short-lived term and everything. I think if he had lived today, he would have been the greatest collegiate coach in all the world. To do what he did in the short time he was here, and I'll never forget going down to beating Texas, and we beat them on 3 field goals. That was one of the happiest times of my life, and he could get more out of any football player and than any coach that I could name. And he was well loved. He was 190% out of any football player. That's how much they thought of him and loved him dearly.
What about Bear Bryant? What do you think of him?
I think he was one of the greatest coaches he'd have to be, and the men that he brought up made men out of them, and he was a gentleman at all times with the press, the media, everything else. And people have various things to say about Bear, but I think to me, the men that he made and worked with them, he'd help them in every way in the world. And if he wasn't, if the man got out of line and he couldn't be straightened out and had no intentions of straightening himself out in his classes and grades and on being a part of the football team, he didn't hesitate to get rid of him, and he was that kind of a man. But if a man showed any willingness and needed help and everything else, tutoring, doing all, Bear would do all those things and help him in every way in the world that he could. And to bring a man out of the slums like people like Joe Namath and make the kind of man that he made out of him. And one thing, Joe Namath visits hospital, crippled children, this and that and the other, and very little we ever hear or see about that, and he doesn't do it for the publicity of it either. And people like that come from Bear Bryant's football teams, you got to admire that man for that. Mm-hmm. And one thing, Joe, I have always refrained from ever saying anything derogatory about any coach, any football player, any referee, or anything else. And when our student body boos the referees or anything, I try to, help stop them from doing that and quiet it down and that sort of thing, because we're all human, and if a mistake's made, it's made, and I just don't think that all football players, regardless who they are, lose a football on a tackle, and the fans start booing them, and whether it's the quarterback, whether it's the guard, whether it's a tackle, or whether it's a halfback, or what mistake, missing a tackle, or whatever it is, or fumbling the football, I don't think anybody's hurt any worse than the kid that it happened to. And that's the way I look at it. And by the way, I want to tell you one more thing. My second favorite school is Oklahoma State. And I feel this way about it. Anytime OU can't do it, I want OSU to do it. Because whatever's good for Oklahoma is good for me.
Yeah. I want to regress just for a second. You sold newspapers, and then after you left the slum area, what kind of work did you do?
Whenever I started an ice cream business, and I would go, and this was also working downtown. I had frozen ice cream bars and frozen ice cream of different kinds, and I had a large, wasn't a thermos, it's a large bucket pail that I would carry and go in different stores and And I knew when different breaks in office buildings and different people were having breaks and stuff, and they'd be looking for me, and I went into that business, and I made more money than, of course, I kept my old customers in the newspaper business. My regular customers, I wouldn't let them down. I have to tell you another story. Forrest Denning, who was president of the City National Bank, when he died, at that time the City National Bank was on the corner of Robinson and Grand Robinson. And I had to pay for my papers every evening, regardless of what. And I had to go in and borrow $12. Went in to talk to Mr. Denning. He was one of my customers. I delivered the paper to and explained to him what was going on. He said, well, I can't loan you the money through a note, but he said, maybe we can work out something here. And he called a girl and got me $12 and had me to sign a little piece of paper on it and so forth. And I'd take him rolls of pennies every time that I could and paid the $12 back that way, and I didn't have to pay him any interest or anything else till I got squared away with the paper companies. You know, I mean, my newspaper route people that I had to pay every day.
Mm-hmm. When did you start working at Tinker?
In whenever they first opened it up, I think it was 1940, they started out there, and I was fortunate enough to land this job.
Did you work out there during the war?
Yes.
What'd you do out there?
I was testing engineer on concrete,
okay,
and I was on a water well testing DO2 engineer for them, and I made quite a grade up there, and then that's when, of course, we were having children, and I was told you about working the 3 jobs and keeping that up all the time. And Lucille would have my clothes ready for different jobs, my lunch packed, and
well, that's quite a chore to hold down 3 jobs.
Yes, it was, I'll tell you, but that was back in those days, and you had to do it, you know. And when we didn't have anything, we got married, and having children right off just made it that much rougher.
What were your feelings on Pearl Harbor Day when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor?
I felt like that I just couldn't believe that kind of an attack on this country, and I thought at that time that right then and there was time for me to go to war. That was what my intentions were and what I was going to do. And that's whenever the Tinker Field, I'd gone out there and see what I could do. I really went out there even laboring or doing anything, wanted to enlist, whatever I could do. It didn't make any difference, and that's when I got into the Army Engineers.
What'd you do on VJ Day when the Japanese surrendered?
I was downtown, went downtown, the biggest celebration in all the world. Everybody was drinking, having a ball, and just hooping it up. And I was at the Biltmore Hotel, and everybody tried to get me to help them out and do things because the hotel was full and everybody's going wild and all the rest of it. And I said, no way, I'm going wild with them, and I did.
Well, Cecil, I'm about out of tape, and Trying to think.
Be very interesting for you. Don't put it on.
Okay, Cecil, thank you.
One thing, Joe, that I failed to tell you, and I wanted to tell you, that I dress in red and white clothes 365 days a year. I've only got one black suit that I wear to funerals. In fact, I've got my own funeral arranged, and my casket's going to be red and white, and 3 flags on my casket, which will be Old Glory in the state of Oklahoma and No You flag. And Smith and Kernke have all the arrangements over there. That's been made and done. My family's not going to have to move or anything else. I've got my flowers are going to be red and white carnations, and I've got my 3 songs picked out. And the first one's a national anthem, and the next one's Boomer Sooner, and everybody stand up, clap, and sing that. My one finger's going to be pointed up, number 1. And my 3rd song is When the Roll's Called Up Yonder, I'll Be There. And I'm going to be upstairs on the 50-yard line watching OU play. Yep. And I've given released all that they can do whatever they want, and that goes for, let me tell you too, that after my funeral, anything you want to use in this slide, you feel free to do so.
Good. Thank you.
Okay. Let me talk to him, Seal.